everyone, and welcome to the recorded version of our webinar. My name is James Fester, and I am going to be taking you through the Virtual Interpretive Tours webinar. This was originally scheduled for 2 nights a little while back, and a lot of people wanted to join or were not able to join us for the in-person version. So this is going to be more or less the exact same thing gone through in a recorded on-demand version for those of you that may have missed out. So a couple of things before we get started. First and foremost, let's make sure that we get you connected with all of the resources you're going to need. So if you could please go to this bit.ly, you will see a Google Doc. This Google Doc will have all of the links that you need to be able to look at the resources that are going to be shared in this PowerPoint. And it'll give you all of the resources that I'm going to be calling out here, as well as some additional things to get you started designing your own virtual tour. A little bit about me. I am a former classroom teacher, an instructional coach. I've currently work as a professional development facilitator for a fantastic organization called PBL Works. Basically, I teach teachers. In addition to that, I'm also an author. This is my book right here that I co-wrote with a really good friend of mine, an excellent educator, George Valenzuela, about how to use project-based learning to teach environmental science. It's published by ISTE. You can get it online. Hope you pick it up if you think it'll be useful to you. It was a lot of fun to write, and I'm really excited to be able to share it with so many other educators. Additionally, I'm a National Geographic teacher and grantee. This project that I'm sharing with you now is a result of the National Geographic COVID-19 Emergency Fund for Educators grant. I'm very, very grateful to National Geographic for funding this project and hope that you enjoy the resources that they helped support. And then finally, possibly most important to this webinar is I'm a volunteer interpreter. I have worked as an interpreter, and we'll get into a little bit about what that means in just a second, at the county, state, and national level in multiple states. And I currently still am a National Park volunteer and was a 2021 Teacher Ranger Teacher inductee. So that really kind of helped inform a lot of what you're going to be seeing today. So let's talk about what exactly are you going to be learning or going through in this particular webinar. Well, first thing is you're going to have the option of experiencing virtual tours from the perspective of a learner. During the live webinar, we kind of went through an exploration of some of these things, but you're going to be able to get to do that on your own if you would like. Really what we're here to talk about is what exactly is this project? Why should classroom teachers adopt these practices? How do you design and build your own tours? And last but certainly not least, what are the resources that are available for you to build your own virtual tours like the ones that I built? Because that's really what this is. I've put together a lot of stuff. I've put a lot of hours into this project. I don't want you to have to do the same thing. I want this to be easier for you. And so I want to make sure that you know of everything that is available to you. So let's talk a little bit about this. These are called virtual interpretive tours. What does that mean? What other languages do you have to speak? Well, that is actually not exactly what interpretation means. Interpreters can indeed be people that help translate or explain something in one form and put it into a form that's easier to understand. Well, that's very, very much what I do as an education interpreter for the different park units that I volunteered for. It's what park rangers do as well. They basically explain everything around you. And it's the educational approach that they use. If you want a formal definition, here's one. Take a moment to go ahead and read that. The things that I want to draw your attention to is that interpretation is an educational activity that uses specifically, and most important to what we're going to be talking about, firsthand experiences and illustrative media rather than simply communicating factual information. So what that means is that it is a way of teaching that relies on showing rather than telling. That's my kind of simplified definition of it. It's a little bit more, it's very simplified compared to the more established definition that we saw earlier. But basically what it means is that we are going to teach you things by showing you rather than telling you. Here are a couple of differences between more traditional sit and get methods of education and interpretation as an educational approach. So in a traditional classroom, the teacher is usually the focus. They have a one-size-fits-all lesson plan. A lot of it is direct instruction, sit and get. Choice is usually pretty narrow or an afterthought. And then learning, it may include equitable perspectives, but this is really dependent on either the curriculum or the teacher. It's never a guaranteed. Now let's juxtapose that with interpretation. Well, learners are the focus here, and knowledge is shared with the teacher as the facilitator through multiple means rather than one size fits all. And instead of the teacher leading through direct instruction, an interpretive teacher will instead use provocations, questions, dialogic thinking, or other types of activities that provoke, meaning kind of elicit a response or a reaction. Doesn't mean provoke in a violent sense. It means just gets you thinking. That leads to critical thinking and considering these different things. Choice is of course central because based on who is in the audience and their needs or desires, the entire lesson could be different. And then finally, learning is centered around and it is an equitable practice. A lot of people are very concerned with equity nowadays, and interpreters are also very concerned with that because when they teach, they're asking the learner to reflect on what's being taught through their own lens. And so they use their own worldview, their own beliefs, their own experiences to really kind of make meaning out of what is being taught. Another thing that's really different about interpreters most of the time, as opposed to traditional model, is that the environment is the second educator. What does that mean? Well, for example, if you were to go to Sequoia National Park in the mountains of California, the rangers there would be teaching lessons based upon what was around them. They use the resources of the park to make sure that the learning sticks and is framed well and contextualized and makes sense. So they talk about botany, they talk about photosynthesis, they talk about tree growth, they talk about the carbon cycle. All of the things that they teach relate to what is around them. And believe me that if you are learning about photosynthesis, if you're learning about the carbon cycle, if you're learning about the importance of protecting and preserving the environment that you're in next to the largest living thing on the planet, that's going to stick around. That's going to stick with you. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this project, because I really wanted to be able to bring this kind of place-based philosophy of education to students regardless of where they were. Didn't matter if they live in a rural part of the country, a big city, even a different part of the world. I wanted them to be able to engage with these same resources that park rangers get to engage with and inspire their audiences with every single day from wherever they are. And I wanted to empower teachers to be able to create the kinds of outcomes, the kind of learning environment that I found so helpful when I was in the classroom. During the week, I was a teacher in a classroom. During the weekend, I would go out and I would teach in through parks, but I didn't do a lot of crossing over until a little bit later in my career, and that's really what I wanted people to be able to do with this. So I created 3 exemplars or examples focused on 3 different subject areas and 3 different grade levels so that you could look at this process. You could download them and use them if you wanted to, or just use them to model your own. And these different resources are going to be available or are available on the website that is connected to that Anchor doc that I asked you to open at the beginning. And I hope you'll take some time to go and look at these and to visit them. And please pass these on to anyone that you think might be interested in this same kind of teaching. Another reason why it's really another thing that I wanted to make sure to do is that I wasn't just saying anecdotally, well, this makes sense to me, and so you should do it. I wanted to see what the research said. So I did a lit review before I completed this project and learned some interesting things about virtual trips and virtual experiences in general. And what I learned is that there's not a ton of research out there. I suspect there's going to be a lot more because during the pandemic, these kind of educational activities really took center stage as more and more places shut down during shelter in place. So I think there's going to be a lot more research coming out soon, but here are some of and this isn't everything I found, but here are some of the most interesting ones. Virtual trips, virtual field trips, or virtual trips like the ones that I'm going to show you how to build, boost reading scores on standardized tests. Virtual trips help promote equity by exposing students who may be cut off from cultural institutions an opportunity to develop their worldview. And also, virtual trips engage and motivate students who are at risk, and they do so more effectively than the regular curriculum. So those are three things that I learned that I wanted to share because this doesn't just make sense because I'm telling it to you. It's research based. So how do you design your own? If you've gotten a chance to look at the examples that I've created, it took a lot of time to design those, and I wanted to make sure that this process worked well for teachers that maybe didn't have as much time as I did. So I went in and I created a system. This is the same system that I used to create the three exemplars that I shared, and I'm going to go through it with you. At its heart, there are three components to these virtual tours. There is the teacher's guide, which is the Google Doc. That is a step-by-step script. So you don't have to be well-versed in the subject of geology to lead that Yosemite tour because I've given you a step-by-step, thoroughly researched guide that you can adapt and change so that it meets the needs of your students and it's ready to go. The second thing that's a part of it, so that's the teacher's guide. It's the Google Doc that you read as you lead students through these different experiences. It also explains the big summative activity at the end. That's check for understanding and assessment. Everything that you need to do this is right there. That's your lesson plan. The other half of it is a student guidebook, which is a Google slide deck that allows students to access what I call vistas or 360-degree photos in Google. It also allows students the opportunity to insert answers, to think out loud, to reflect, to do journal reflecting and through a journal. These are all the things that it allows students to do. And it also is a place basically to collect all of their answers so that if you do want to use it as a form of assessment, you can. And then last but certainly not least, the Google Maps Street View crowdsourced photo collection and the National Park Service teacher portal are all things that you're going to be folding into these tours. So that's the basic outline of how these things were constructed. You use the teacher guide to lead the students through the guidebook, which is made up of resources that you gather from the NPS portal and Google Maps Street View. But to design them, how do you do that? Well, the way that I always got started was beginning with the end in mind. And what I meant by that is you want to make sure that these tours are teaching content that you are responsible for teaching. What are the learning goals for your virtual tour? What should students come away knowing and understanding? What are the standards you have to teach? What frameworks do you use for skill development? Are you aware of a resource that you want to lead them through? Because this doesn't necessarily have to be something that checks off boxes. It's great if it does, but sometimes it's just like it makes sense to just go ahead and lead your students on a virtual expedition to open their eyes to a really important resource or a place that they may not have been a part of. But in the end of the day, you really want to make sure you begin by considering what do you want to teach your students or what do you want them to have experienced by the end of this tour. And that's step one. Once you have an idea of what you want them to come away with, you can begin to connect that need, be it content or experience based, to resources. So this is what I did. So I have here on the left concepts or essential knowledge, learning goals, if you will. And then what I needed is a place in the world that I could point to that would enable me to do what park rangers do every day. It's like, where in the world can I take students to teach them the geologic timescale? Like, what's the best place to teach that lesson? And so what I did is I started trying to connect one to the other. And the reason why and I'll tell you a little bit more about why I've kind of focused on national parks, but this process does not necessarily have to be national park based. You can use museum websites, you can use zoo websites, aquarium websites, any other kind of virtual resource you want. But I'm going to tell you why I use national parks in a bit and why I'm focusing on that. Not just because I'm a park geek, there's actually a really practical reason, but you can see how the learning goal is connected to a resource in the form of an actual place. And that's really important because that's how you get started. Now, let's say you are having trouble. You're blanking, coming up with, okay, well, I really want to teach the geologic timescale, but I don't know a place where that is something that could be observed. Well, if you can't think of a place, it's easy enough. You just go to the website for that park or that museum and you start pulling resources off of it. If you can't think of one, here's what I'm going to suggest you do. Go to nps.gov/teachers. Type in the concept or the learning goal and see what parks have resources and lesson plans connected to that place. And that's where your that's where you are going to connect needs to resources, because we want there to be a place where needs and resources are getting connected. That's where you do it. Okay, so we have our learning goals, we have a place that is going to allow us to draw in resources. The third thing is to connect these concepts to vistas. What exactly is a vista? So a vista basically is a 360 degree image that illustrates that concept. Now, it doesn't have to always be a 360-degree 360-degree view. For example, I use a lot of Google Street View, and that's another reason why I connect to national parks, because national parks are quite well loved and visited. Millions and millions of people from around the globe go there, and they want to take memories back, and sometimes those memories are 360-degree photos, and sometimes those memories are uploaded to Street View. So you have this great repository where you can virtually visit these places, but you don't always have to have that, but you really want to basically be able to say, here's my learning goal. In this case, let's go with fossilization. It's an important third grade science standard. The real world example or location would be, of course, one of my favorite places, Dinosaur National Monument in Colorado, which some of you may be familiar with. It has a giant rock wall that is chock full of dinosaur bones that can be observed. And so if you were to transport yourself to that place, that is one of the best places in the world to teach about dinosaurs and fossilization, in my humble opinion, because it's right there in front of the students. And you can use that same kind of connection. Remember, we are showing, not telling, to really inspire students and make that learning stick. So what you need to ask yourself is this. Searching, and if you search on Google Maps for 360 images, you can find those things. Ask yourself this: how does the concept, or how does what students are looking at relate to your concept? You're there, pretend you're there. What would you say to your students to help them develop their understanding of the connection between the concept and the place you're at if you were physically there? Because that's what rangers do every day, is they look at the thing, they look at the people, and they try to connect the goal, the learning goal or theme, to the tangible or observable thing that people are standing in front of. And that's what you're going to do too. What would you say if you could take your students to Dinosaur National Monument? What would you say about fossils? What would you ask them to look at? What would you have them consider, or what questions would you want them to think about? And that's kind of the beginning of connecting these learning goals to these places. Now, we want to make a whole tour, and so you got to do this a bunch of times. So this is how you construct your learning experience. Here's an example. You start with a concept, you come up with a question, and then you find a vista, a view, or some sort of virtual resource they can connect to. So for example, if I was teaching causes of the Civil War, there are a couple of concepts, and these are just a few, by the way, this isn't everything. Here are 3 concepts that are pretty darn important to know about if you wanted to learn about the series of events that led to the Civil War. Now, we all know it was more or less the primary reason of the Civil War was slavery, and these things are all outgrowths or results of slavery, or different aspects of that cause. So I want to make sure my students understand these 3 things. Now, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to combine a vista or a view, a 360 image of a place, with a formative question that if I ask them and they answer it, I know that they understand that concept. So the view allows you to ask the question, which gives you an understanding of whether or not they understand the concept. So it's kind of backwards forwards, but here's what that might look like. So I'm going to go to the last one. The attack on Fort Sumter. Obviously, a good place to talk about the attack on Fort Sumter and how that kicked off the Civil War is Fort Sumter. A question that would help your students, or help you understand whether or not your students understood the importance of that event, might be something like, how did Northerners and Southerners perceive this event differently? Something like that would really help you. If they could answer that question, you would understand that they really understood the importance of the attack on Fort Sumter to that learning goal. And basically what you do is, to construct the experience, you do a bunch of those concept formative vista, and each one of those creates a stop on your tour, something to show them, a question to ask, and a concept to kind of see if they understand or explain it. And then you're going to combine that with a kickoff and a checkout. The kickoff is the launch. It gives the students an introduction to the learning event. It engages them. It gets them interested in what they're going to do. It gets them asking questions. There's examples of that on that Google Doc that I shared with you. The summative on the other hand, that's interactive. Sometimes it's interactive. It requires synthesis. What you basically want to do is ask them to do something where they have to synthesize all of the information that they learned on the stops to demonstrate overall understanding of the learning goal of the entire tour. And I have an example of that in that anchor doc for you to look at. So once you've done that, you've constructed your entire experience, the last thing you want to do is make sure that you get feedback. For example, sometimes vistas, those 360 images can get taken down or the links can break. So you want to make sure you do a walkthrough the night before. Just click on everything and make sure it works. You also want to share your tours with your peers and make sure that they think that it makes sense and that they understand everything. It kind of just helps you make sure and that you have the goods and you're ready to go. And then finally, one thing that's really important is accessibility. We want these tours to be things that all students can really enjoy and understand. And you want to make sure they're well scaffolded or that you've provided the things that they need in order to be able to do what it is that that you need them to do to learn. It's important that you think about which are the students of greatest need in my room and what would they need. Because if you, to be successful, what scaffolds are they going to need? What kind of accommodations might they need? Because if you can take care of those extreme users, everybody else is going to be well taken care of and will be successful. If you have questions, here's all my contact information. I hope that you will visit the website of Park-Based Learning, the project that's supporting us. Again, huge thank you to National Geographic and to everybody who has sent feedback about this project so far. If you would have questions, if you want to learn more about how to do this, if you want specific help, either in creating your own tours or you just want to know more about what I did, please, please, please reach out, parkbasedlearning@gmail.com. I'm always happy to help anybody out with any questions they may have. But that's about it. That's the webinar. And again, thank you so much for visiting, and I hope you found it helpful.